Imperfects presents a very special episode. Sit back, relax, and grab yourself your own cup of vulnerability. This is the Vulnerabilitea House.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, to the Vulnerabilitea House.
The Vulnerabilitea House, that's right.
It's great to have you back. If you chose to listen after my vulnerability from last time,
which was brilliant. Should we explain again the way that the Vulnerabilitea House, other than it being like one of the better puns of 2021, the Vulnerabilitea House is where we share vulnerabilities. We pick a card from a deck. We put out three options. So today it's going to be me. So I'm going to be picking a card. And so the three cards will be laid out. There'll be a question on each, and each question will lead me to share some sort of vulnerability about myself. And I choose one of them, and then I talk about it.
We should probably talk about the reason for that, why it's so important.
Yeah, true. Yep.
Everyone knows we're a big fan of Brené Brown. I mean, we called the podcast The Imperfects, but she talks about one of the keys to better mental health, experiencing happiness, all that kind of stuff, is the ability to be vulnerable, which is something that we're not typically great at.
Yeah.
She talks about vulnerability as being emotional risk, or that kind of feeling of uncertainty when you kind of step outside your comfort zone or whatever it is. And the reason that is important is because that's what leads to stronger connections with people. Authentic, genuine connection comes from being vulnerable. And we've seen that all the way through this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
You know, anyone who has the courage to share their story, the feedback we get from them is that they've just been inundated with love and empathy and support from people who listen and from their loved ones as well. You know, Jack Watt's episode, he talks about the amount of people that in his family, his life, that he was having, it was really awkward around, but when they listened to his episode, they just got him a lot better. So this is the idea that when you are truly vulnerable, it leads to stronger, authentic connections. And that's kind of why we're doing this as an example of how it could work.
Yep.
And probably a shout out to Bluey as well for our our collaboration with Bluey, our Bluey cards.
Well, we should say it is a reluctant collaboration because Ludo Studio, who produces Bluey, have no idea we're using the only cards we could find, which are Bluey cards. But they're great and they're working well as cards. But isn't with vulnerability also the other thing that it is good? It's good to combat shame. It's like the thing to combat shame with. Like if you isn't that sort of, it
absolutely.
kind of pairs up with that.
A massive part of Brené Brown's work is like we all have shame about something, and if we don't talk about our shame, whether it's I'm not smart enough, I'm not funny enough, whatever it is, or I feel like I'm a bit of an imposter at my work, I'm not quite, whatever it is. When we don't talk about it, that shame grows and grows and it becomes crippling after a while. Shame can't survive empathy. So when you talk about your shame, people give you empathy and love and support. That shame that you have starts to sort of diminish.
Yep.
So that's kind of the whole point of this exercise, the Vulnerabilitea House.
So today in the Vulnerabilitea House, so you went last time here, I am going to choose a card today. Well, I'm going to put out three cards.
Can I have some vulnerability?
Oh, yeah, we've got to pull some
Josh?
vulnerability.
Yep.
God, it's just so rewarding whenever we say the pun out loud. Like, it just feels good. You know, it's like, just takes me back to that moment where one of us thought of that pun, whoever that was. Anyway. No need to point the person out.
I think we.
What's that?
That's right. That's all right. Let's go.
No, that's say. You were going to say who thought of it?
I think we're now sharing teas with swap teas, maybe.
Oh, okay.
That's properly vulnerable stuff.
That is. Okay, here we go.
No,
okay.
Let's move on with the cards. We can sort that out later. Okay, three cards.
Here we go.
Okay,
what have you got?
Okay, so the first one says, who are you envious of? Okay, and the second one I've drawn is, what were you embarrassed about as a teenager? God.
God.
How long have you got? And the third one is, how would your ambitions change if you only had a year to live?
Oh, they're really good.
Wow.
I mean, I was only giggling when you read out the first one because that was kind of your episode. Who you envious of was kind of like your episode in the podcast in season 1.
Yeah, so I probably don't need to go into that again. If you do, I mean, you can kind of get like a bonus answer to that if you listen to my episode from season 1.
It was Josh, by the way. That's the person who's envious of Josh.
Josh Van Colenberg.
We can talk about it some more.
And the second one, what were you embarrassed about as a teenager? I think I have something for that. But then the third one option is, how would your ambitions change if you only had 1 year to live? Which I also really, I feel like the second one is probably the one that could be the most vulnerable about. I'm going to be very vulnerable about that. All right, let me just sip. Okay, so I'm going to choose that one. What were you embarrassed about as a teenager? Just sip some vulnerability.
Do you need some time or?
No, I've got it. I know it. I've got one. Okay, so here we go. So what was I embarrassed about as a teenager? So I went to an Anglican school, but I'm Jewish. So that's not the reveal. But being back then, being a Jewish kid at an Anglican school, I was so embarrassed.
Really?
Yeah, I hid it from everyone. Like no one knew. Because I guess like when you're at school, you just sort of want to be different. You don't want to be different. You want to be just the same. And it's not like our family were the family is not extremely Jewish, but we still did like fortnightly Shabbat dinners, so like the Friday night dinners, and that we'd go to the grandparents and all the cousins would go, and I would have to do one of the prayers, like one of the
really,
yeah. So like because the kids sort of take it in turns to read out the prayers, so I would like in Hebrew, like read out these things. So I had like this sort of secret Jewish life that no one at school really knew about, to the extent where I would like lie about what presents I got for Christmas. Like, because, when you're a kid, Christmas is such a big thing. Like it's such a huge part of the year. And so at the end of the school year, everyone starts getting excited for Christmas. This is like primary school. And I didn't know anyone else that was Jewish. And I was just really like kind of ashamed about, like, I guess looking back, it probably was a shame of mine. And then coming back to school, like the next year, I would, like, everyone would be like, what did you get for Christmas? And I would just make stuff up. Because in truth, like and people can't believe this. People who don't really know Jewish people or aren't Jewish can't believe this. But like my Christmas days growing up literally just did nothing. Like on Christmas Day, I mean, it makes sense because if you're Jewish, you don't have Christmas. But when I tell people that, they say like, but what did you do on Christmas Day though? And I was like, nothing. Like we just, like sometimes we'd have a family lunch, but I'd just like watch TV while everyone else is having like this Christmas thing. So it's like, I felt like I was like, it was this weird thing. Or one Christmas Day, this is when I was probably like 19 or something, and I must have just been home alone. And I went out to get lunch because I'm 19 and hopeless and couldn't like make anything myself. So I like, was driving around the streets around my house, and the only thing open is like a Chinese restaurant. Like there's sort of the only things open on Christmas Day. And I went in and had like and ordered like whatever I got, went home, ate it, and got food poisoning. It's like the saddest Christmas story of all time. And it was just sort of this whole thing through school, like this thing that I felt like I had to keep from people. Like I couldn't tell anyone this thing about me. Were
there certain scenarios that made you really anxious? Like things that would happen regularly at school, you're like, oh, this is where I need to...
Maybe not regular. I mean, the biggest one that jumps to mind is because I had a bar mitzvah, and because I wasn't at a Jewish school, like for months and months, maybe even a year before that, I had to go to Sunday school. And so I had to go to a school that was like sort of connected to a synagogue every Sunday morning and learn stuff about like the Torah, which is like the Jewish Bible. But it's a big scroll, looks way cooler. And so I had to learn all this stuff. And then in like the months leading up, I was because the big thing that you do on your bar mitzvah is you step up in front of like the whole congregation at a synagogue, and you have to read this massive passage from the Torah in Hebrew. And because I, believe it or not, can't speak or read Hebrew, I had to memorize this other language, and it goes for something like 10, 15 minutes. Wow. And so I had to memorize this thing. And so I was just terrified of doing that. But the thing that made me the most anxious of all is that I had to invite my friends from school to my bar mitzvah, because most of it's like family, friends and stuff. But you invite friends, like that's... So for the first time ever, they were like all there. You know, the boys had to wear a yarmulke, like a skull cap thing. They had to wear that, and they were all in there, and suddenly like my worlds were colliding, and it was terrifying. I was nervous about reading the thing, but most nervous about the fact that people were like in the place that they were never supposed to be. Like no one's supposed to see this side of me. And they all said they loved it. Like it was like so interesting to see the other culture, but to me it was like this sort of shameful thing. But ever since then, I think the thing that it's done is that like from being a kid until being an adult to now, it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. But I have never really learnt about Jewish heritage. Like it's this weird kind of, because I'm not embarrassed about it now, but because I was when I was a kid, it's like stuck with me, like to the point where I haven't seen Schindler's List. Like I don't want to. I know it is funny. Like it's kind of a weird thing. And I've been to Berlin and like been to the Holocaust Museum, and it was pretty confronting. I've been to Israel now, and which is like really moving. But it's quite a strange thing for me, because it was such a thing of shame as a kid that I didn't want anyone to know about. And so like as I became an adult, like and people always ask me questions about Judaism and ask me like, oh, so what happens when blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't really know. Like I'm not really I was just saying I'm not really properly Jewish. Like I am, but right. I'm not.
I find this fascinating, because I feel like there'd be shame on top of that shame of like, you'd feel ashamed that you were feeling shame to be Jewish.
Yeah,
is that like
exactly. Yeah, the double shame. No one wants the double shame.
You got it.
Yeah. So it's and I think only now am I starting to, and also like and there's this other sort of layer on it where, like, so my grandfather escaped the Holocaust when he was, I think it was maybe 12 or 13. His parents put him and his sister on one of the trains out of Austria, like during the war, to England to escape, and then he never saw his parents again. And he tried for years to try and find them when he got older, but they clearly probably died. God. And it's this thing, and I now, he's passed away now, but it's sort of this thing where I feel a little bit like I guess ashamed now that I never really showed much interest in that. Like I didn't really want to ask questions. Like I didn't want to ask him questions and didn't want to. Yeah, and now I kind of sort of regret that, and feel the shame now is that I don't know about like this huge part of my life, huge part of my family history. And there's nothing that anyone could have done to change it. It was just because I was in this weird middle ground. If I had gone to a Jewish school, it wouldn't have been the case at all, because it would have been completely normal. It would have been weird to not be Jewish. But because I had this sort of experience growing up, I'm now having to sort of whether it's like, I've started like trying now to kind of read about it and actually learn about what this part of me is. But yeah, that's a long answer to what were you embarrassed about as a teenager.
That's a fascinating answer though. Yeah. I find that so fascinating, because I can't help but think about our dad coming from a different country, age 12, but if you asked him, he wouldn't identify as being Sri Lankan, really. He would, as Australian. Yeah. And I don't think there'd be any guilt for him. I wonder if it's something to do with what Jewish people endured and have had to put up with, and the horrific stuff that happened.
I think maybe as well, thinking about it now, like as a kid, if you don't know anyone, and like, at my school, there's no one Jewish. Like, a lot of the people, especially even people that I meet now, they often haven't met a Jewish person before, even though there's a lot of Jewish people in Australia. But there can be a misconception, especially when you're younger, that it's weird. Like it's just sort of this. It's a different culture that is. I mean, like so many different cultures have to endure, but it's like you are different, and a lot of, especially the Orthodox Jewish people, they dress differently, and they whether they're wearing like the furry hats or whatever they're wearing, they seem different. I think especially as a kid, you could look at that and go, I don't understand you. And so you just think that they're different and weird and you don't want to, you can't, it's harder to accept them. But, and I reckon I had this weird thing where I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like I was thinking this thing where it's like, oh, I don't want to be different, so I don't want to be you.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that because I wanted to be accepted by like my friends at school. So I was sort of like pushing away this thing, which was it's just kind of a part of who I was.
I mean, what a stark contrast for you trying to hide this part of you, and then suddenly not only are you letting the people in who you've been trying to block it from, but they're coming to a thing where they hear you speak in a different language for 15 minutes up on a stage in front of all these people. It's like, it's the most extreme opposite of what you've been trying to do.
100%.
Like, couldn't be more.
So true.
Yeah. But it's also interesting how such a simple, kind of innocent, natural desire that every teenager has to fit in has that little acorn of behaviour has spawned this like 20-year, 25-year journey of like of sort of ripple effect of different things in your life. It's incredible.
I mean, even just now, like it's just sort of dawned on me that this is now. It's like this is the podcast, like me talking about this, and it. Like I'm fine with it. Like I said, to be very clear, it's like I'm absolutely not ashamed about it anymore. I'm not, like you say, I'm ashamed of the shame that I had, and I love it now. But it's a weird thing to talk about, the thing that you were at one point in your life you're never supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, you're not that you're not supposed to, but I didn't want to talk about it. Anyway, so that's me, guys.
Thank you for sharing that. And the purpose of the Vulnerability House is we're not trying to solve anyone's problems here. We're just here to listen. I guess that's kind of when you have a cup of tea with someone. You're
saying being Jewish is a problem? That's what I heard. Because if you want to be cancelled, just say the word.
Oh, very good.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the vulnerability. It was delicious.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for sharing.
Very well shared
Pleasure.
stuff.